Hey everybody, Professor Snart checking in for our online 1102 class. I'm just getting myself clicked into it here. So we've just finished up Unit 5, which had you looking at a short story called Boys and Girls by Alice Munro, and then doing some different kinds of writing about it. More of a straight summary, just a factual reporting of what happened, and then more of a response. You know, I liked, I disliked, I identified with the narrator, I didn't, that kind of much more subjective sort of opinion kind of thing. So again, like I said before, those two kinds of writing were separated out for that unit so we could see them as sort of diametrically opposed. And I think as a lot of people found, it's actually kind of hard to write summary. You'd think it would be easy, you just give the details of the story. But ironically, we're kind of conditioned to do more interpretation or analysis, so that's the mode we fall into when it's not opinion. So we think of opinion and analysis as sort of the opposites, but really we want to see summary as the kind of the extreme form of having no opinion, if you want to think of it that way. So again, sort of artificially separating those out for Unit 5 so we could really clearly see those differences. And then now that we move forward, we get closer to our first major essay assignment where we actually do practice much more of the interpretation analysis. So it's neither straight summary, just a factual reporting. And of course, it's not just opinion-based writing, I liked, I didn't like, or that kind of thing. It's much more the mode that people are probably a little habituated to now, without even thinking about it, is that interpretation or analysis mode. So be sure that you were successful in separating those out for this unit, and also able then to see these different kinds of writing. The response, the very subjective, opinion, I voice kind of thing. The summary, which is just a reporting of what happened in a story. And then somewhere, I don't even know if it's in between or exactly, or just a different kind of writing. That interpretation or analysis. So it's your interpretation, although you're not writing in the I voice, it's still your kind of reading of the story. And that interpretation is supported with details. So that would be derived from a kind of summary reading. In other words, looking for how particular details or events from the story can be worked in the form of quotation to support an analysis or interpretation. Okay, so we move on to Unit 6 then, which is locating secondary sources. And there's a little bit of video feedback that's part of Unit 5, or, kind of looking at your work for Unit 5. But then the bulk of Unit 6 has us reading a couple of more stories, Gorilla My Love by Toni Cade Bambara and Araby by James Joyce. And what you'll see is that these, and particularly Boys and Girls, share a lot in common in terms of they're about these younger characters, younger narrators going through a kind of life change sort of a thing, a coming of age story. So you'll see, not coincidentally, that there's a lot of commonality between at least these three stories. Flight Patterns, the narrator is obviously different, but he goes through a kind of life change as well. Anyway, so you're reading those stories kind of in preparation a little bit for giving you something to write about for the essay when it comes along. But the main focus for Unit 6 is getting used to the kind of sources that we use, secondary sources, in 1102. So this is another unit that is a building block unit. It's not terribly demanding in terms of what you have to produce, but like I said before for earlier units, it's absolutely one of those units where if you don't kind of learn what you need to learn here and then apply it in the major point situations like those major essays, it is a major stumbling block in terms of your grade. So not getting this stuff right when it really counts will have a major, major impact on your grade. In fact, it really is, the material we learn here really is something that you have to show me that you understand and can apply to move beyond 1102. So think about what I'm really saying there. Not getting this right in the final essay means that you don't really move beyond 1102. Okay? That's about as important as things get in our class. But it's not complicated, and there's examples here and very, I hope, transparent instructions. So it's not like, again, some magical or mysterious sort of thing that you've got to figure out and just hope for the best. It really is designed to be immediately apprehendable and then applicable in the writing situation. So it's high stakes, I guess, but it's pretty easy high stakes if there is such a thing. Okay, so it's set up like a discussion board, but really what you're being asked to do is use the library databases to find material or a critical source or a secondary source or a research source, sometimes it's called, pertaining to one of the stories that we've looked at. I would recommend against trying to do flight patterns because it's really hard to find appropriate material. So stick with Boys and Girls, Gorilla My Love, or Arabic. Those are much more commonly written about stories as far as finding scholarly or secondary material goes. And so let me highlight this now, and if there are problems later, I will point back to this moment for when you sort of needed to learn this, although I'll highlight it throughout, but this is the kind of key moment. For us, in terms of the research we do for 1102, which is often called the research class, you have to use database material. In other words, you can't go to Google, Wikipedia, anything that's just sort of general web-related stuff, even Google like books if you use that stuff. You might find a scholarly book, but the process of you doing that isn't the research process that we want to practice, which is using these databases. The ones that I suggest are McGill's on Literature Plus or the Literature Resource Center. Again, there's walkthroughs for how to get to these things, how to search within them. And like I said, there's usually, at least for what we're doing, a wealth of material, so it's not like finding a needle in a haystack. You can do pretty simple searches for things and find material that's going to be applicable to, certainly to this assignment and to the essays that we write for the class. So again, not really complicated. But the sources we use have to be, if they're not print that we're using, most of them are electronic, and for us they have to be database sources. So if we get to the final essay and you're using some source, regardless of how credible or not that it is, but it just came from the web, that shows me that you just don't have this basic knowledge to move beyond 1102. So I can't really put it in any clearer terms than that. The other thing that we're looking to make sure we understand is the difference between a primary source and a secondary source. So clearly what we're dealing with here is secondary sources. And for us, writing about literature, it's actually very easy to distinguish primary and secondary. The primary stuff is just the stories we read, the literature. So whether it's a play, one of the short stories, that's the primary text we're talking about, the focus for our interpretation or analysis. Anything else is a secondary text, and that is a direct discussion of the primary text. So if you were to take Boys and Girls, the short story, for example, as your primary text, and then you were asked to do research on it and find a secondary text, for our purposes here, it would need to be material from a database, and this is the other component, is an appropriate secondary source is a direct discussion of the primary text. So you wouldn't want to find something in your psychology textbook about child development, for example. It might be kind of tangentially related to what goes on in the story, but it's not a direct discussion of the primary text, all right? So it's not an applicable source to use, certainly for this exercise, but in the essays that we write as well. Similarly, even if you went to the databases, so you've used the right source, right, to find something, but you end up finding something on, early Canadian rural farming or whatever the case might be, which is kind of the setting for the story. Again, unless it discusses Alice Munro's short story directly, it's not an applicable, relevant source for our purposes. So there's two fundamental things that you've got to learn here. First is, again, for what we're doing, anything from the web has to be database material. It can't just be whatever you find through Google or some other search engine. And the other component is that any secondary source that you use has to be a direct discussion of the primary text that you're writing about for your essay or whatever the writing assignment is. So, and those two things have to be understood and applied for you to move beyond 1102, which is, again, kind of a make or break situation, but it really is pretty easy to learn this and then apply it. You're practicing it here, of course, and then when it matters in the essays that we write, that's really where I'm looking for the application of that concept being learned and applied. It's not even really a concept. It just really is pretty cut and dry, pretty simple. Okay, So we continue to move at a pretty good pace throughout our course here, so be sure you're keeping up with things. Don't leave things to the last minute. Be sure you're attending to all the examples and stuff that's in the course, not just kind of skipping to find the assignment part. And obviously that you're paying attention to these because they're not really introducing new information, but reiterating in a way that I think really highlights what's important in the course in an important way for you to pay attention to. And like I said, I've been teaching this course long enough where of the 20 or so students, often there'll be one or two, by no means the majority, and it doesn't even happen all the time, but who get to the final essay and use completely random sources, just web stuff that's kind of related, but it's not, it's just not appropriate. And they fail the course. They fail that last major paper and they fail the course. It's a basic inability to learn the material and then apply it. And in any cases where, people ask, well, why did I do so poorly? I will point them back to, among other things in our course, this unit and this video that you're watching right now. So, it's, again, just one of those fundamental things. I can't really explain it any other way. I think you probably get it at this point. All right, so if you have any questions, be in touch with me, and otherwise we continue with our units back to back here, it seems, and I'll talk to everybody soon.